guys, it's Jason from The Art of Ask a King. We are back with Ryan Ferrier, founder of 60 Day MBA, and we were just getting to the point where you were talking about how you've gone out, run these processes for other companies, sort of did what you did at Serious Business, and then did it for Crowdflower and started doing it for other companies too. But at some point you said, you know what, I want to go back into business for myself. So tell me about that decision.
Yeah, well, I mean, so what happened was, like you said, I kind of become this COO kind of specialist for startups. How do you run a startup business? And I got to the point where I wanted to run a business that the end product was something that I was very connected to. Because normally what I would do was I would partner up with a technical person who kind of had a vision technically for where the product was supposed to be, and then I would implement the business side.
Right.
And so I wanted to figure out, like, all right, how do I create a business where the actual product we create I'm very connected to?
You wanted to be close to the product. You didn't want to just operate the business, but you wanted to be involved in what the product was doing, who it was serving.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's when I thought, like, okay, well, what's my specialty? Like, what's my niche? And my niche is running businesses, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought, like, what if I could bottle this up and begin to teach this as a course for people looking to get businesses off their ground?
Yeah.
So, and then initially I did that with Silicon Valley startup companies. I was an interim COO going from company to company to company, right before funding, right after funding, helping them get their processes in order and start running their business.
Right.
And initially started working with that market, but then as well, just people that knew me were kind of now, all of a sudden they couldn't believe that I was like an entrepreneur, right? Like if you'd met me in college, I could like barely turn a computer on.
Yeah.
Like yeah, and I'm still to this day, I'm like, like an IT guy's worst nightmare. But, they were just like, you're a tech kind of entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Anyway, a lot of people who had businesses that weren't these high growth, like super risky tech businesses started coming to me for advice. People who are like, I teach fitness and training to a group of people in Raleigh, North Carolina, right? Or I write marketing copy, and I have these really compelling narrative snapshots that I do for customers. Could I turn that into my own freelance business? Or like I have a services business where I help expats who are in France immigrate to France and do business in France. Right?
Those are all people that you've actually helped through 60 Day MBA.
Yeah. I mean, those are 60 Day MBA examples, but people were coming to me, even before this, friends and family with very similar businesses, right? And these are all like 60 Day MBA businesses. So I started helping those people, and their problems are, they had a slightly different set of problems, but a lot of the problems are really the same.
Yeah. So I want to ask about sort of like the barriers to even getting to that point where you're like, I want to, like, I think a lot of people have that feeling like, man, I could do business around this, or I really like doing this, and people seem to like it when I help them with that, but I don't know even like where to start, right? So one thing that I think a lot of people are afraid of is like the risk, right? And I think the risk is a lot of things. It's like risk of looking bad. It's risk of like, feeling like a fool, like you left your job, like your good paying like corporate job, and to do this stupid thing that like didn't even work out. Like, how do you talk people through? I have a couple of these, but I'm curious, like how do people think about that, right?
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, a lot of the folks who we work with are, like I said, we call them unsuspecting entrepreneurs.
I love that phrase. It's
right?
A great
Because
phrase.
because what happened was, the reason that all these people started coming to me because they're like, you don't look like an entrepreneur, right? And you're like, I would never think you'd be an entrepreneur, but you are.
Yeah.
So like they felt safe, like
it's okay to ask. You're the person I can ask the questions to, right?
Yeah, and like my IQ isn't so high that like I would just start talking in like strings of just like really complicated things about coding and programming and blah blah blah. And
you're like the therapist that they can
exactly.
come to.
And so you nailed probably the biggest fear, right? People always say that money is like the number one issue that they're worried about. Either they don't have the startup capital, or they don't have the money to like spend time on this, right? Or spend full time on this. But the truth is, I think the number one thing that holds people back, and usually this comes in our second conversation, is like, I don't want to look stupid, right? I don't want to put myself out there and feel dumb when people don't like my first idea, right? right? And so one of the things we try to do is create a really safe environment for people to get out there and fail, because guess what? Like every successful entrepreneur out there has faced the same thing, and part of being a successful entrepreneur is just the ability to keep going, right? And so creating an environment where you can do that in a low risk, low pressure way is really important.
Kind of building up that like base of resilience, right?
Yeah, and understanding, and this is something that we talk a lot about in our course, is that everything is a test.
Yeah.
Right? And so, you know, if you get rejected by somebody, or you are making an offer and someone doesn't accept it, you've just learned something, and then now all of a sudden you have more information to go back for your second test, which will be better. And instead of people seeing their first offering as the ultimate and final thing that they're going to do, being able to take a lot of pressure off that first offering and saying, hey, this is a test.
Yeah.
And we've only been around for a quarter at this point, so like 2.5 months, and it's been crazy to see how many people have already come through the doors, and see how many people, like literally like dozens and dozens of folks getting out there and failing, finding out it's okay, and getting up, and now literally making, you know, thousands of dollars doing whatever it is they love, because it's not because they weren't smart enough or they didn't have it in them. It's just that they needed to get through that fear.
That's sort of the pain point, right? Like I remember I did a rejection therapy thing for 30 days where, you know, I went out there and I feel like I'm pretty persuasive, but I don't like getting rejected, right? And so to flip it on its head and say like the goal of this exercise is to go out and get rejected, get no's, was kind of crazy, but at the same time, it forced you to be okay with it. You realized that it was okay, because, you know, it's like in any given, you know, people feel like you're getting personally rejected. But what I realized is that you can't get personally rejected, especially, you know, like you got an offer with a certain person in a certain situation, and just in that moment, they're not ready to say yes. You know, that doesn't, like, they can't even know you well enough to like personally reject you. It's like that's not even possible.
I totally agree. I mean, it's exactly it. If they reject you, they're not really rejecting you. They're rejecting whatever offer it is. And now you have a learning, and you come back and you say, okay, here's a new offer, right? The other thing that we like to do is we like to teach our entrepreneurs, how is it that you actually partner with your early customer, instead of drawing a line in the sand and saying, I'm making this offer, and then you either accept or reject.
You're on the other side, I'm on this side. Don't cross the line.
How do you actually use the fact that you're just starting out to your advantage? We call it startup judo, right? Like you use your enemy's, you know, energy and strength against them.
Bringing it with you.
And so, you know, like when you're doing this startup judo, you actually have a number of things on your side. Like one, people love to give advice, right? And so you can ask people, early customers, actually for advice, right? Two, people love to be in the position of kind of helping something get off the ground. Right.
Feeling like it's like the whole Kickstarter thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
People feel so like much a part of it.
Exactly. And then third, people love to be early adopters. People love to say, oh, I took that course before it was a household name, right? Or I used her services back when she was just starting out.
It's the hipster effect. It's like before you thought it was cool, I already knew. I was already listening to it.
Exactly. And so we like to walk people through a process of how to partner with their early people to do that.
I love that. So then we talked about risk, and we talked about how we can sort of adapt to risk and adapt to those feelings of rejection. Let's talk about money, right? Because that is the one that also comes up. Like, you know, you're working at a job, you're putting some money away, but like maybe you've got a couple months of savings, but what are you gonna do? Just take a jump and you don't have the money, or maybe you don't have programming skills. How are you going to, pay? You're gonna pay somebody else to like do your first product. How do you adjust with the money thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, money's a real issue, right? And instead of saying like, oh, it doesn't matter, just get started.
Right.
We're actually been working with entrepreneurs and recently created this thing called the when to make the jump formula.
Right.
And so we actually take people through step by step, like, all right, when are you ready to make the jump to do this full time, right? And we actually like to start working with folks and say like, hey, if you've got a day job, let's start with you just doing this on the side, right? And we're going to carve out like 5 hours the first week, and maybe the first month you've got 5 hours a week, right? And then we're going to expand that to 10 and then 20. And what do your revenues need to look like to the point where you're going to make the jump? Now, we do have some entrepreneurs who they, they're seeing success and they're still afraid to make the jump. Right. And those are the ones who just kind of kick them out the door.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like we like to provide a lot of interaction and a lot of accountability, because sometimes you just need that shove, right? Like you're making good money, like you know that this is something that's scalable and sustainable.
Right.
But you're not jumping out there because you're like, oh, but what about health insurance? What about whatever, right? And those are real concerns, right? And but we like to make it really clear, like what are the numbers you need to make the jump, and then what are the decisions you need to make, and then once you've made those, okay, like they're on paper, let's do this.
Right.
And so we're all about transitioning people to that as opposed to just parachuting them.
Yeah, I like that. I think about my time as a gymnast, and when you're learning a new skill, your coach is often spotting you at first. They're kind of helping you. They're doing a lot for you. So they start off by kind of lifting you through the whole thing, and then they're kind of like pushing you less and less, and then they're kind of just standing there and not even, maybe touching you, but not really doing anything. And then there's this point where the coach says, kind of steps back, and they're like, this one's on you, and you're like, but you have your trust in your coach, and he sort of walked you through this process, right? And he's like, the last 3, I didn't even touch you, and you're like, okay, I guess I can do this by myself, and then you have to go through it, but it's not like, one day he just kicks you out the door and is like, do it by yourself, and I'm not, you're not ready, but whatever.
Yeah, I want to steal that analogy. That's perfect. It's exactly, like when we script out the when to make the jump formula, right? That's exactly it. It's like it's first it's like, hey, we'll just do it with you, and first maybe even like we're just modeling it for you, right? And then we're gonna do it with you, and then a little less touch, and then like, okay, like you've done this 3 times on your own. Now it's time to like get out the door and do this, right?
That's awesome. So besides risk and money, are there other things that you feel like have been big barriers for people, sort of either psychologically or just sort of realistically in terms of their situation?
Yeah, I think there are a few. I mean, one of the first ones that jumps to my head is like people often it's similar to the fear of rejection, but it's like self-doubt. Like I could never call myself an entrepreneur. Right. And
it's like an identity crisis.
Identity, exactly. Right. And that's actually the first thing we do is we walk people through kind of like an identity transition. Like, hey, as soon as you start this course, you are going to call yourself and think of yourself as an entrepreneur, right? And it's amazing to watch people's just like confidence, and we do a lot of video interactions, so you can even see them, like they're sitting up a little taller. We had this one lady, Libby, right? And she's the one that does these narrative snapshots that I was referring to a little bit earlier, but she does narrative snapshots for really complicated tech companies so that they can help explain a day in the life of their customer or their end user to either an investor or a partner, right? And she said the most amazing thing for me is when I started, like I just didn't know that I could actually call myself an entrepreneur.
It's like you need permission. You need someone to give you permission to
exactly.
say.
And like it's like not only is she an entrepreneur, she's like taken a consulting business, which is like sometimes hard to figure out what your offering is, and she's packaged her offering in a really clear way so she can now sell it as a product, right? Which is something we go through as well, is if you are doing kind of a more services approach, how do you package it as a product so you can get paid up front, you can do it repeatably, you can be an expert, all these good things. But she's, and like literally she's making these transitions in days and weeks, and it's all here.
It's like, there's all these techniques and these strategies, but a huge part of it is like that shift mentally. A big part of my study on like behavior change and how people form habits is around I've seen that like identity is a big part of it, right? You go from like I'm a smoker who's trying not to smoke right now to I'm someone who does not smoke, right? And I'm having a craving, but that's like a very different set of ways to think about the situation.
And I mean, and to piggyback on that, the other thing that helps in that scenario is that if you have friends and family who tell you, hey, you're not a smoker who's just in the process of becoming not smoker, right?
Right, when you have that external.
And that's the coolest thing for me. Like, when we started the course, it was like, I guess in the back of my head I knew this would happen, but to watch entrepreneurs come alongside each other and say, like, no, you are an entrepreneur, like, and if you don't think so, make sure you send me an email.
Because it's a group setting, right?
Yeah.
So that really helps.
And for me, that's like, when I see that, it's just like, it's like very heartwarming. I mean, I'm a kind of cheesy guy, so it's like
chicken soup for the soul for entrepreneurs,
Yeah, I mean, as like hard as we like to be on people and like really push them to action, and as accountable we like, to keep people, like, the truth is that, at my heart, I'm definitely a softie.
So I want to wrap this conversation up for a second, and sort of when we come back, let's talk about specific strategies that you're giving to entrepreneurs and showing them to get them started.
Great, I love it. Let's do it.